Well, today marks 1 year since Governor Josh Green was sworn into office, and early today he delivered a statewide address where he outlined some of the progress made by the Green administration in year one.
Yeah, he also talked about his priorities in the coming year and the upcoming legislative session. We're going to dive deep into that with our live guest. Governor Josh Green is in the studio. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And joining us now live here in the studio is Governor Josh Green. Governor, thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thank you.
We know that you've had a busy morning thus far, delivering an address, sort of outlining some of the accomplishments you've made so far in this, your first year. And we want to talk about some of those highlights, but we also want to just start off by talking about some of the more hot topics, some of the things that have been making headlines over the last few days, starting off with the acquisition of Hawaiian Airlines by Alaska Airlines. Wanted to get your general thoughts on this, and if this was something that you were briefed on before the announcement happened on Sunday, and any discussions that you've had thus far with both CEOs.
Yes, thank you. So I was briefed the day before, the Saturday before the Sunday announcement. I think we are going to have to just watch it very carefully. In principle, it's good for us because we'll have more support, more resources available to us, more routes overall. When I did talk to the two CEOs, I emphasized our need to keep all of our routes available to us and all of the flights available to us. So we have to really be careful not to lose jobs. They promised that they wouldn't take any union jobs away. They promised to make sure that we're a huge hub here for Hawaiian and Alaskan together. So I was pretty satisfied, at least with that moment, but this is an 18-month process where they have to get approval from the Attorney General and our team.
I'm interested just on your sort of emotions about it. This is such an important, iconic brand to Hawaii. It means that we will have a hometown airline in name only with the, with the company based on the continent. What are your feelings around sort of, the transition of this brand?
Well, the airline will still be a reflection of our Aloha spirit because it'll be run here by people from Hawaii. And I think they're going to need more and more employees from our community, not less. So I'm optimistic that that will shine through. It's a difficult situation because there is no easy way to keep an airline afloat these days. The big boys put a lot of pressure, and I'm talking like the Deltas and the Uniteds of the world, put a lot of pressure on the smaller airlines. And you could see that even in the form of the recent fare war that broke out, where I believe it was, American offered a $91 one-way trip between the mainland and the islands. So you can't easily compete with that, and it's hard. I do know that the leadership over at Alaska Airlines are good people, and I do know that they're going to listen to us when we speak about what we think is valuable. They know Hawaii very well.
When I think overall, when we hear from people who express some concern about just what's happening here with this industry, it is also a sense of loss of a Hawaii brand, where something that is a local brand that is now having to be bought out by a mainland company. And there is concern about other brands that have had a longstanding history here in Hawaii, noting that it is difficult to do business within the state. Overall, how do you think that we protect some of these brands, but also these local companies to be able to continue to do business here in the islands?
We have to support them. For example, when Jamie and I went to Japan very recently, just a couple weeks ago, it was an extraordinary event that Mana Up put on, and that was in partnership with a ton of our local brands. And that rollout over at Haneda Airport was twice bigger than any pop-up ever happened before, twice bigger than the Disney pop-up that happened. So Hawaii's brand is strong. People love it. They love it across the globe. I think we have to reach out. I think we have to push out beyond our islands to promote ourselves, and that will help us survive internally too. One thing that's always a reality is we have 1.4 million people. As compared to almost every other state, we're small. Compared to every other nation, we're small. But we think of ourselves as big because we have this big identity. That's what makes it challenging. We will continue to fight for our local brands, and we're going to make sure that they keep branding Hawaiian the way it has been, which is a caring airline.
You know, you talked about your trip to Japan. I want to ask you a little bit about that. You also mentioned it in your speech. Given the, currency pressure that we're seeing, the yen is just so weak compared to the dollar. What kind of outreach can we do to bring back the Japanese visitor, given how much more expensive a trip to Hawaii costs now compared to pre-pandemic?
We have to fight to keep our prices down somewhat. It's really hard, but people were commenting to me from across the country, including at the highest levels, like the ministers of tourism and the economy. It's 3 or 4 times as expensive as they're used to when they're buying Saimin, when they're coming here for regular things. And that's a challenge because the yen is so weak at the moment. What I can do is I can fight to get us a corridor between Japan and Hawaii. You probably heard me mention a little bit about that. It's been tried before, but no one decided to put resources into it. In order to get that done, we need Homeland Security to sign off on it, and have some relationships there with the Homeland Security Director. We also have to put in resources to make sure that when we do the pre-clearance over in Japan, that we help with some of those costs. It would probably be greatly to our benefit because right now about 5 million plus Japanese travelers go to either Hawaii or the mainland United States, but only 1.5 million at our peak came to Hawaii. I think we can capture a larger percentage of that market. So I'd like to see this happen. It's one way. It's just one way to make sure the Japanese travelers know that they feel welcomed here. But until the yen strengthens, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, just to follow up on that pre-clearance program, because this is something that has been voted by the IGE administration, and obviously nothing has come about since then. Are you saying that the biggest changes now is that you're making this a priority, and that that there may be more federal support, or that the state will be able to invest more money in that section of the pre-clearance? How do you think the tide is changing to maybe now allow this idea to come to fruition?
I mean, the fundamental difference is just my team is different. We chase problems a little differently. I think it's always been something that could be viewed as a priority, but it's out of the box. No other state has this, so it's hard to get these kind of things done. But Hawaii is unique, as we know, and we do have this unique relationship with Japan and Korea and other nations. So I'm just going to push very hard. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we're doing FestPac next year in June, bringing a lot of other nations together. I'm taking advantage of the relationship that I have with the president and with the cabinet as a result of the Maui wildfire. I have a lot of contact with them. The president did have a relationship with Governor Ige before, but it was also a different administration for much of Governor Ige's term. So it is an opportunity for us. Sometimes you just got to push into a problem and its time will come.
Okay, let's talk about Maui since you did mention it. How are you feeling about the housing situation there? We've heard a lot of talk about trying to transform these short-term rentals into long-term rentals, specifically for the fire victims. What's the latest on that?
The latest is I was on Maui with the victims' families throughout last week, and then had an extraordinary meeting with the mayor, who I do work very closely with. 2 things came from that. One is that the trauma, the greatest part of the trauma revolves around housing, like you say. We have to move those 6,500 individuals that are currently in hotel rooms, 6,554 as of this morning. We need to move them into long-term rentals. No one yet has kind of seized the moment and grabbed a bunch of short-term rentals and moved them into long-term rentals because they don't have to. Well, we have to make them do this. So the current proposal is for approximately 3,000 families. 2,000 of those families qualify for FEMA benefits. 1,000 families don't qualify for FEMA benefits. They are either COFA migrants or on work visas and so on. FEMA will cover those 2,000 individuals. We need to pay a pretty high rate to get people right now into a 2-year lease so that they're okay for 2 years in a condo, in a house. FEMA covers all that cost. The other 1,000 we will share with philanthropy, donors, supporters, local businesses, part of our One Ohana initiative. That will cost the state, if we split it, $60 million to $63 million per year. Philanthropy covers some similar number. And then we have 2 years to build out Ohanas along people's houses, ADUs, those smaller units, to build out what I believe will be necessary, probably about 3 villages. We can do this. We absolutely can do this. But if people refuse to take a rate that was consistent with what they made last year and get some tax breaks, because the mayor, as you know, proposed to decrease their property tax. It was heard today over at the county council in Maui. If people don't do that, I am going to get serious about this, and I'm going to call for a moratorium on short-term rentals on Maui until we get 3,000 units. I don't want to do that. I want to be very clear. But under emergency circumstances, I'm going to pull the trigger. So we will have to do that if we don't have enough housing for our local families on Maui, because they're reaching the breaking point, and we're getting to the holidays. Enough's enough. So anyone who's listening out there who's got a short-term rental, you're about to get a very good offer of what you got paid over the last 12 months, plus some tax breaks. People need to come aboard.
And just in the response that you've heard thus far from community members who have been impacted, the families that you speak of that are in this situation, is this a plan that they support? Is this the type of path that they would like to see forward? What are you hearing directly from these families about what they would ideally want to be in for this situation?
Yes. Well, in fact, not even just the families, even the activist communities, even the people that were protesting, like some of the individuals from Lahaina Strong, some of the individuals from that were doing the fishing for housing. Those were some of the proposals that they made. In fact, it's kind of what the proposals were, which is move us away from short-term rentals into long-term rentals. Here's something I learned over the last, say, 2 months. There are about 15,000 short-term rentals between the legal and illegal rentals on Maui. 15,000. We need 3,000 of them to take care of people who lost everything. I believe people are going to step up before I have to come down with the hammer and pause short-term rentals island-wide on Maui for this purpose. I believe it's going to happen. I'm getting encouragement from FEMA. I'm getting encouragement from the mayor, and I'm definitely getting encouragement from the families. That's what they want.
Okay, so let's talk about what that hammer actually looks like, and if it's actually legal. How would that actually work?
I would do it through emergency powers. I'd call for increments of 6 months of moratorium on any short-term rentals until I reach the threshold of 3,000 units. I don't think it will be a taking. That's the word that the lawyers use. A taking is something if someone already has an asset, already is generating a resource for like their business, and then government comes and takes something away when you're in the stream of doing the work. This wouldn't be that, because we would offer the full ride, the amount of money that was being generated. We probably shouldn't do so much because that's a lot of money. But also, I do want to give us a long runway to gradually transition away from short-term rentals. Individuals who take this opportunity will really do well because they'll be in a stable two-year rental contract and agreement for a family. Of course, it's insured. They'll be fine with their property. But also, they'll get the tax benefit because they will get to change over to this low or non-existent property tax. That's why it's a doubly good plan. And then I'll release the moratorium. The benefit of it to the people who go in is they'll get the benefit of this tax position. For those who are too slow on the draw, they won't. They'll be in the regular tax situation, maybe even higher. We'll see what the county council passes over on Maui. They may raise taxes, and they probably should on short-term rentals. I like what they've been talking about at that level.
And just if there is a surge, say that there's more than you need, how do you prioritize which individuals that are offering up these rentals get that opportunity? Say there's maybe 5,000 come to the table, and is it based on first come first serve, whoever applies first?
Best match and first come first serve. One of the things that we recognize is that there are a lot of people who need specific houses because they're near their school. Their kids have school nearby. So we'll try to position the rentals, and I hope this is a problem we're facing, having too many short-term rentals converted to long-term, in close to their jobs or their kids' schools. After that, we'll release, and then we could go to the next phase of legislation. I think it would be terrific if we started to ratchet down the number of short-term rentals through a tax change and see a lot of long-term rentals just there, because this is going to end sometime in about 2 years, and then we're going to need housing. By then, hopefully parts 2 and 3 of our plan, building out the Ohana units and building out long-term housing, will be in place. There's one final wild card, and that's expediting building over where the burn zone occurred. Now, that's going to be a great challenge, but I think it's something we should aspire to, and it was talked about with the governor's advisory panel. Really good people, by the way. The mayor's advisory panel. The mayor surrounds himself with a lot of the local families that have been affected by the fire, and they give him good ideas. What I think should happen is we should expedite building permits once the property is clear. Once they know environmentally that it's okay and safe, then we can start giving people permits in one-offs if they want to rebuild their houses. Again, this has always been an issue for the community. They have to decide what Lahaina should look like, but people do own their lots. And I think that if those who want to build back that were living there, which was 561 families, probably have to be given the right to rebuild. If we can expedite their permits and let them start kind of accelerating their own home recovery, that would be incredible.
You know, you mentioned that you have a strong relationship with Mayor Bisson. The Attorney General is pursuing her investigation of what happened on that day, what some failings were, what perhaps we can learn from this experience. They've issued 3 subpoenas now to Maui County as part of their investigation. Tell us a little bit about your reaction to having to do that, and does that mean the county's not cooperating?
Well, that was a little bit of a bummer. I will tell you that. I have to allow the Attorney General to absolutely be independent in her approach, and I did share that with the mayor. I prefer everyone be able to work together without any discussion about subpoenas or any of the formal legalities that exist, but that's between them. They have to get this information. They have to expedite it. The Attorney General has told me on numerous occasions she's not focusing on criminal activity or concerns like that. She's focusing on details that will help us create policy that will make people safer. And I think that the mayor understands that. Sometimes these kind of conflicts arise. I actually did my interview with the Attorney General and their team and shared all that I know about the fire leading up to it, the storm, the day of, and so on. And I think it's kind of important that everyone do that, not to be judged, but instead to help us go forward. Because we have the legislature coming up in just a couple weeks. We're going to have a recovery package that will be somewhat dependent on what the investigation uncovers. How much we invest in fire breaks, where you make your investments on new forms of housing, what kind of infrastructure you have to have, how much firefighters you have to place and pre-position in areas that have red flag warnings. These are real questions that the investigation is meant to answer.
And we want to get to, of course, the legislative session that's coming up and how what's happened on Maui is going to impact some of the budget and all that. But sticking with Maui and just overall your relationship with Maui County and the Bisson administration, how often are you speaking, and how would you characterize the relationship that your administration has with them? Because there are so many moving parts with this that there often is maybe some differences in ideas and suggestions on how to move forward. How do you manage through and navigate that relationship when there may be some disagreement?
We just go through the process with respect. You know, I have people that are embedded with them and they with us. Luke Myers, for instance, is our recovery expert, and he is with them all the time, every day. I talk to the mayor at least once a week, more than that in some cases. When I went with him on Maui last week and spent time with his inner circle, they asked that I come every week and be there with that inner circle because it was a very, very productive work period. I also have to be mindful that they should make decisions for their own county, that they should shape the future the way the people on the ground want it. I sometimes have a pretty large presence in the media, and I think it's important that the mayor have that presence on Maui. It's always one of those dynamics, but I respect him. I know how hard the challenge is because he knows the individual families much better than anyone else could, and that creates an additional, very, very emotional part of the challenge. But we get along. People kind of want a little conflict. They like that. It's not real usually. Sometimes, like, I may propose 50 million here, and he may see a different number there, or I may want to accelerate this part of the rebuild, and he may want to review it and accelerate something else. But we're fundamentally on the exact same page. We talked about these plans. We bounced ideas off one another. I really referred to it as a framework because they have to pass the bill in the county about the taxes, and I'm probably the only one that has the full authority to do a giant moratorium if it has to happen. And then I would have the legal firepower with the entire Attorney General's office to back it up if it was necessary. So there are some implicit differences in what we do. Plus, I have to go to the federal government to get resources. So I trust him to make the right decisions for his people as we rebuild, but a lot of that has to be in his wheelhouse.
Let's talk a little bit about the environmental concerns. We had our first major rain event, and we welcome the rain. Much of the state is in drought. We want to have it, but we don't want to have it right at the burn zone. How concerned are you, and what were you doing to track any possible contamination into the ocean? And we're in the rainy season now, so we expect more of that.
Yeah, we need the water. We really do. But we also can't afford to have the runoff of heavy metals into the ocean. So we did apply Solitech, as you know, quite rigorously. That was a decision that was made by all, and it seems to have held. I haven't heard of any significant spills into the ocean. It's a concern, of course, now that we're in the rainy period of the year. The balance was they were almost out of water up country, like literally out of water. They were already conserving, and that goes way back because we don't have as many wells as we'd like. There have been restrictions on creating new wells and so on. And as you know, we really need water to build housing. That's been a long-standing challenge on Maui, which people go back and forth on. We need water for agriculture. So I'm grateful for the rains. We're going to continue to apply what we can to kind of secure the land. But the reason we want to accelerate into the Army Corps of Engineers and get all of the debris out over the course of a 6-month period instead of like a 1.5 year period or something way longer is because we want to get those heavy metals out, all the toxins out, so people can start rebuilding and also replanting. Because until you replant, you can't keep runoff from happening.
Is there a targeted timeline for that process that you are keying in and that you're working with the Army Corps of Engineers to meet this deadline? And if so, how does that look? Are you guys on schedule, and what does that timeline look like?
Yes, on schedule right now. It's a 6 to 9 month period. 6 months is very optimistic. 9 months is more realistic. It's a $1.5 billion project for which we have 100% coverage right now for just 6 months. So boy, would I love to get it all done in 6 months and have all of that cost be carried by the federal government. I will ask for an extension, of course, and get a broader window to have costs covered. The president has told me that he would be open to me asking for these kind of things. If we could get much of the work done in 6 months, that would mean sometime in midsummer, before we even reach the 1 year mark, that we could start, giving some people permits and start doing some of the extra infrastructure work to rebuild parts of Lahaina. That's really what I would like to see. They've had much longer stretches of time in California. They go 3, 4, 5 years in some cases before they were able to rebuild. Because it's a very close community, and because we were quick to contract actually with Army Corps, it's possible. The EPA guys did go through things very quickly. They did keep to their calendar, which was 3 months. So fingers crossed it will happen.
Maui tourism has been reopened, island-wide for about 2 months now. The visitors are not coming back. HTA did unveil a plan to try to market Maui to visitors. Talk a little bit about that tension, what you're hoping for that. We know that tourism statewide is down. What are your concerns on that, and how do we appropriately market Maui?
Well, it's delicate, as you know. On the 1 month anniversary of the fire, I did signal that we had to at least prepare ourselves to open. And I hope I was very clear that it was going to be a soft and kind of quiet reopening. I said it many, many times, and it was obviously going to be quiet. That's why I was not too concerned about just beginning to open the door, just a crack, because people have to have their jobs, and we have to have revenue statewide to do these huge projects. Tourism has been pretty flat. The budget, as you know, was way wildly optimistic based on projections of growth at 6.5%. As the previous administration left, that was just a number that people dream about. It almost always gets ratcheted back, as we've seen over the years, to 4.5, 3.5%, and so on. Because of the fire, we ended up closer to like the 1.7% growth. That's what you'd expect after a natural disaster. But I couldn't let people think that all of Hawaii was closed. If we did that, if we thought that all of Hawaii was closed from the mainlanders' perspective, we would see a devastating recession in our state. And then we'd be talking about very deep cuts in services for our keiki at schools, in firefighting services, in healthcare services. I think we're okay. I think actually we're pretty stable. I think that our larger problem continued to be housing and homelessness, honestly. I think the economy just kind of normalized, and now we have to get Maui back. Mostly it's going to be on the other side of Maui, though. I think you're talking about kind of at about 50% rate right now on Maui, but other parts of the state, other markets are increasing. So you're going to see more travelers come to Oahu. You're going to see more travelers go to Big Island.
As we continue in this conversation with the governor, we want to remind all of you that we are tracking comments here on Facebook, as well as encourage all of you that to scan the QR code that is located on the bottom of your screen if you have a question directly for the governor. As we begin to head towards our first break and wrap up this segment on Maui, I do want to ask about just the overall unemployment claims that have been made for the island of Maui. We know that this is a department with the Department of Labor that has had to step up to support many of those who now find themselves unemployed. What updates can you give us and provide for us about the numbers that you're seeing in terms of unemployment there and the benefits that are being provided for those who continue to find themselves out of work because of the fires or because of the setbacks because of the economy?
Well, in broad strokes, Maui normally represents something around 10% of our unemployment rate. During the crisis, the statewide, it surged to about 35% of our statewide unemployment numbers. And so you would expect that. Many thousands of jobs were wiped off the map, all of Lahaina. All of the jobs will gradually recover at the hotels. In fact, that and more, because they had a shortage of workers at the hotels. They were unable to do a lot of the services that they wanted to because we've had this workforce challenge all the way going back to COVID. So I think people, if they want jobs, will absolutely be able to get them. But basically, to reflect on one of the earlier comments about whether opening was right or not, and how are you sensitive about that? Can we market adequately? If people are not ready to go back to work, they shouldn't. This one gentleman told me a story. He's a bartender at one of the hotels, and he said that every day an individual does somehow or other ask him if he knows someone who passed. And in truth, his father passed. So it's very difficult, and I humbly accept how difficult that is. So we may have to give people some time off if they need to be away. The flip side, that gentleman has lots of children to take care of. He's taking care of the grandchildren of that lost papa, okay? So that has to be something that he can choose to do. When people are ready, they'll go back full tilt to work. They'll go back to 2 jobs probably, because that's what people do here in our state too often. But it's very important that we're sensitive about this. But right now, yes, unemployment is higher on Maui than historically, not as compared, of course, to the COVID era, but compared to the rest of the state.
We've got a lot more questions for you. Red Hill, homelessness, and the Kau Hale program. Our conversation with Josh Green continues in just a moment. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Well, welcome back to Spotlight Now. Once again, we are joined by Governor Josh Green, who joined us now here live in the studio. Thanks again for joining us. We want to remind viewers that we want to engage with you in the conversation. You can enter your questions for the governor on Facebook or scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many topics that are brought up in these conversations with the governor.
Yeah, let's talk about something that you mentioned briefly, and that is Kau Hale and the issue of homelessness. One of the first things you did was open that medical respite center right across the street from Queens. The contract on that is running out, so what happens next?
Well, I committed to the people in that area, that part of town, that we would move out sometime shortly after the beginning of the year. So on about January 8th, those individuals will start getting their care over at the H4. We added 10 beds, operationalized their staff there. So that's where they'll go. Meanwhile, we're building a whole slew of additional Kau Hale across, Oahu and the whole state. Waikiki Vista is one. It's going to have 125 units. The Middle Street Kau Hale broke ground, and they should be ready in January. That's going to be 54 units. Iwilei Mental Health Kau Hale is going to be coming before long. We started the Central Maui Kau Hale. Of course, we have Waimanalo, Kalailoa, Waianae. There's one in Puna. So it's really expanding. By the end of, I'd say, about a 2.5 year period, if everything goes well, we'll have over 1,000 Kau Hale units. The number is actually a little over 1,300. And that's so people who were unsheltered and homeless will have a tiny home to go into. As you know, this is one of the things I view as central to all that our administration should try to do, which is decrease suffering and make sure everyone gets care. Having the Kau Hale right in front of my house was meant to be practical, but also partially symbolic that we should do it in our backyard.
When you list off all those different Kau Hales that are going to be popping up throughout the state, a lot of people will just assume the price tag that is involved with that. What can you tell us about the financing, how the partnerships are working to be able to sustain such a robust program like this?
So remember that when people are on the street, we are bearing a huge amount of cost. The average, like the median price point for individuals who are homeless and unsheltered in Hawaii has been $82,000 per person per year, 82 grand, because people go to the ER to the tune of $4,600 over and over and over again. We all bear that cost. Kau Hale actually save an incredible amount of money. But having said that, we have $65 million or more devoted to it from the legislature. It's such a successful project between James Koshiba, who's a leader from my team. Nani used to do great work on this and help lead the way in the early days. And then Brooke Wilson, who's one of my stars, my chief of staff, is always involved too. We've got several teams that are putting these together because they will save us from the cost of people overutilizing the healthcare system. For example, I saw Yunji's face when I mentioned that number. You got to also remember that 30% of all the ER visits to see a guy like me in the ER were homeless individuals. 30% over at Queens at one point when it was spiking and peaking. We haven't had almost anybody go back to the hospital when we've put them in Kau Hale because they just get local services from social workers and a nurse. So it pays for itself. It decreases our overall Medicaid spend. But more importantly, it's about the least expensive possible way to house people. The price point on individual units in Kau Hale tends to be like in the $20,000 range per unit. Can you imagine building a small house anywhere near $20,000? It just never, ever happens. So this is a statewide solution. I hope it will someday be a nationwide solution. And we will always do the inventory and the analytics on it to tell people how much it costs year over year. We did 200 units over in Maui quickly, very low impact for $800,000. So there were 168 individuals that were homeless pre-fire on Maui, and we just gave them all space so that they didn't have to go back to the street.
Tell us a little bit more about this Waikiki Vista project that you mentioned. You'll have to forgive my ignorance on this. This is not tiny structures. This is actually a building that people then go into. Who's operating this, and how will that actually work?
Yes, thank you. So the Waikiki Vista is a partnership between me and Blangiardi. And as you know, I work really closely with Mayor Blangiardi. We see each other. We dress up as each other over Halloween. It's pretty great.
That was pretty great.
I love all the mayors. He in particular is, like a great grandfather figure to me. So
great grandfather. Yes, we'll be sure to let him know.
He's a wonderful guy. And he gave us this idea to do a vertical Kau Hale. And so the vertical Kau Hale, yes, it's apartments, 125 units. He provides the building. We work together on the renovation. We provide the services, the wraparound services. It's the services and the building of community that makes something a Kau Hale, whether it's several small hales that are spread out on a small piece of land like Middle Street, or if it's vertical. When we have a property that he thinks he has, we can share the costs of the management, and that's a good partnership.
I want to circle back and talk about the budget, something that you addressed in your message to the state earlier today about putting together the budget as you move towards the legislature. You talked about and highlighted the 22 reductions in funding from line item vetoes that you've done that calculated into $1 billion worth of savings going into this next budget, which you're going to have to present to the legislature in the next few weeks here. As you craft together this budget looking forward and looking at the projections from tax revenue that does show a significant drop, how are you shaping the budget to be able to fund some of these initiatives like the Kau Hale, but also factoring in the support that Maui needs that maybe was not included within your budget at all, last year?
Yes, so a couple things. That's a very complicated circumstance, but here we go. The $1 billion in cuts happened before Maui. That was when we had the downturn in the projection of revenues from the Council of Revenues. So they decreased us from 4.5% down to 1.8%, I believe. And that carved out over several years well more than $1 billion because we project out 5 to 6 years. So that was one thing. So I already did those cuts. Those were very much want to haves, but not need to haves, that first $1 billion. Then there were projects that had been appropriated in a way that was called cash capital improvements, meaning we had cash, at least on paper, before the projections changed and the fire occurred. Those projections then were used as cash to build out certain projects, to build out something, say, on the west side of the island, which we kept that project. Normally, these projects are bonded. They're going through a bonding process. This year, we're asking for $750 million in bonds. It was important that I balanced the budget, which I did, and showed that we're not using the rainy day fund, which I preserved, so that when we get bonds, we get very good interest rates. Just like when you're buying your own condo. If you get a good interest rate, you can buy a lot more house because you have a low rate, you can do well. So I had to do that. So we converted a lot of those cash capital improvement projects over to bonds. We still kept a surplus. We have a couple things to celebrate. We will have over $500 million one year and over $800 million in reserve the other. We still have the $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund. Now, we may need to use some of that. We'll see. But converting that cash opened up $283 or $285 million that I will have available as we help settle with those who lost a loved one and do some of this housing that I've talked about in the first half hour, because we need to provide some support for housing. Once again, we have to decide what the right investment is for our state, but I also did not want to walk away from our signature projects like our big housing dreams that we need for Oahu and across the state. The money's already in there for Kau Hale. It was already in there for the loan forgiveness program for physicians, which we need for all of our kupuna. So I didn't have to cut any positions, but it got a lot tighter.
How flexible are you on the rainy day fund? How much of that are you willing to dip into?
I'm willing to dip in as needed. I've already told our team, try to live within our means and not use the rainy day fund if at all possible. I'm willing to look at up to $200 million initially if we have to. I don't anticipate that right now, but there are a lot of uncertainties as we go into this housing movement, as we decide what infrastructure we're going to try to put in quickly for Maui and for Oahu and for Big Island and Kauai. We have to have housing starts. Now, I can do a lot of that just by getting rid of red tape, but that's sometimes slow. As you know, people really took the knife to me on the housing emergency proclamation, which I still, for the life of me, think is irrational to knock down any kind of housing initiative that we have as long as we're not building on conservation land, which I never will do. But I have two different options. I can either push harder with infrastructure dollars and sometimes just buy housing, or I can decrease the red tape and let people build it with private equity. And I think that people would prefer that. Now, finally, there's still going to be this question of how do we deal with climate change and all the other things we have to do. We need a climate impact fee. I said that before the fire. If we had done that, then we'd already have $100 million or more a year that we could be putting towards fire breaks, towards housing, towards relocating some infrastructure away from the shoreline, towards putting people up in long-term rentals that have been converted. We should have done that, and I know that that's the right thing to do. The only question is, What is the appetite at the legislature to either increase the TAT tax, which I know it makes people crazy, but on the other hand, wouldn't we rather have tourists paying for some of this impact that they create rather than our own families that are living right near poverty?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about what was deemed as the green impact fee that you were really advocating for that would address, as you said, some of those climate concerns that you've had. The last time we had this conversation, you had talked about, as you just mentioned, increasing that TAT to include it within that, because that was one of the sticking points that ultimately led to this green fee not being able to make it through the legislative session. As you advance and as you move towards this January start of the legislative session and the discussions that you've had thus far with the leadership in both the House and Senate, have they been receptive to this new positioning of increasing the TAT? And if you can get a little more specific about how that would look in terms of its structure overall.
Well, it's the easiest way to go. It's the one tax that we collect already. We collect it at the at the level of the hotels. We already have very robust numbers of travelers into the islands. It's a lot simpler than creating an entirely new program. Do we have the will to do that? I think it's better than looking at other taxes. I think that we could absolutely do it simply. And frankly, I could find ways to reward participants that are providing the service at the hotels with certain targeted tax breaks if I need to. But it's a very good way to get revenue straight in. Do I think that the leadership will go for it? I can't speak for them. I mean, I really have an incredible fondness for Speaker of the House, the Senate President, my colleagues in the legislature. I know it's an election year. I know that any tax can be controversial, but really it's the right thing to do if we want to put that money right back into our decidedly huge problems, which are climate change is here. We are an island state with sea level rise. We had a wildfire that took out 100 of our loved ones. How could we not find those resources? Now, if the economy just booms suddenly forward again, I could find the monies from the regular budget for that. They'll have to make those decisions because I respect their prerogative.
And just for clarification's sake, because if it doesn't get included within the TAT and goes into the general fund, how will that percentage that you're trying to allocate specifically for this cause be determined? Because it's just going to be an increase in the fee, but how would you allocate that specific amount for these causes?
Yeah, so I would raise it from 10.25 to 12% is what I would do. And in doing that, I would carve out and have the legislature be absolutely specific that either 1% or 1.75%, whatever they chose, went specifically to climate mitigation, fire response, and something else is very important, dealing with the imminent crisis we're going to have with insurance. Now, insurance rates are about to go through the roof because we've had a volcanic eruption and now we've had a fire. And it's very difficult to imagine rates not going so high that a lot of people won't be able to insure their condo buildings, as we talked about. They won't be able to insure commercial spaces. We're going to need to work on that. Now, we already have a program that helps to subsidize that. We may have to create our own insurance product, which is often called a captive insurance model or a captive insurance program. But whatever we do, and I've been talking about this now for a year, it's in our economic interest to do it. And so if they wanted to put all of that money into a captive insurance program and a direct expenditure program like a special fund to help with these fire mitigation efforts, I'm fine with that. I don't want extra money to be just seeping into the general fund. What I want is us to solve this problem.
I want to dive a little more deeply into this insurance issue. And I think, viewers, you might think like, oh, insurance, this is super boring. This is actually really critical and could be quite dangerous for a lot of property owners. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the majority of buildings in our state are underinsured per federal guidelines, which means that if you are a condo owner trying to sell your condo, the person who buys it may not be able to get a mortgage. Where are we on this? How big is this problem, and what are you going to do about it?
I'm told that it's going to explode as a problem in the coming months, mostly because the insurance industry took a big hit with the fire. You can imagine that the damage from the fire is going to be $3, $4, $5 billion. And there was significant damage, of course, from the previous eruptions that we had. So we as a state are going to have a hard time insuring properties. That's where sometimes when you have a problem that's so large that an individual, like neither you nor I, nor Ryan, none of us could suddenly just pay in a huge amount of extra insurance to get a sale done. So we have to come together as a society. And this is a good place for government to be supportive, to help with that reinsurance. I want some of the climate impact fund, or the green fee, if you will, to go towards underwriting in the secondary insurance market these problems so that we don't have that. Can you imagine if everyone who had invested their life savings in a condo was banking on using some of that equity for their kids' tuitions or for their retirement, suddenly saw their values drop by 30 or 40% because no one could come in and buy it because you couldn't be insured? That would devastate us all. So this is a good function of government. Either way, I'm going to have to come up with some supportive resource, some dollars from the funds that we have as taxpayer dollars. But once again, it will be good to have a devoted stream of resource that helps with these problems rather than the old way, which is we already have pretty high taxes in Hawaii.
We know that through the legislative process, things get amended and bills do certainly evolve with your time there as well. Noting that there could be some shifting through different languages within bills, instead of just pouring everything into this plan for raising the TAT, are you going to be introducing any other more specific legislation that may just focus on insurance, that may just focus on the climate impact, that may provide other vehicles for the plans that you have?
Yeah, there's going to be a multitude of bills that will, in much smaller kind of bites, take on smaller problems or pieces of the problem. We also will have a full fire mitigation package, which includes things like having a statewide fire marshal. It includes having extra resources to pre-place firefighters and equipment. There will be resources put out to build infrastructure and housing in each of the departments. There's all kind of bills that are going to be out there. And then the legislators are going to also have their bill packages. So we won't run short on opportunities to do this, but the bigger ideas have to, one way or another, be resolved. We need a lot of resource to deal with the impact of climate change, a lot. It's something that we haven't done before. As you know, we put very little money into the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the Department of Ag. Both are very central to this solution. So we need to beef those up. And I know governors over the years have talked about this, that there's a need to invest more in the environment. Well, now we're in a different era where environment is pushing into our core capacity to insure our homes, to survive in a community. So it merits its own financial stream. And that's why I think we should do a climate impact fee, a green fee, because it's a new era. And I think that's why it will ultimately pass. Will it pass this year? I sure hope so, because we can't keep waiting. I mean, I can just move resources and fight back problems. It's kind of like, yes, you can give me a fire truck and I can shoot the water at a fire for as long as I have water in that machine, but I need a constant supply of water, and that's what the impact fee would be.
Okay, what about Red Hill? Let's talk a little bit about that. And the military overall, we saw this incident with the plane damaging the reef now. Luckily, that was cleared away, but we do know that there are some impacts from that. Do you think that the Navy is a good partner in Hawaii? And when something like this happens, obviously a lot of people get quite upset.
Yeah, we get upset at home too when this happens. There have been a few incidents. We've had multiple challenges as a result of leaks, fuel spills, the plane crash. It's also what happens in a complex society. Things do happen. We fly a lot of flights in and out of Hawaii. There's no excuse to crash. On the other hand, it's great when there's no loss of life. In this case, there could be environmental impact to the reef. That's what's being assessed right now. The military will make us whole. We'll insist on that financially, but some things you can't get back. Now on Red Hill, that is a success at the moment, the drainage of Red Hill. It was a tragedy before when the spill occurred. As you know, there's been a coalition of my team and the legislative bodies and the water board folks, Ernie Lau. We came together and asked for a 30-year plan, $750 million to deal with monitoring wells, watching all the toxins that could come into our water sources, into the water table. So that's all in place. But if we're talking just about the drainage of Red Hill, it speaks to some of the successes of the first year of my team in office. We put a lot of pressure on the Navy. They have delivered in this case with also the pressure of the activist community. We've drained 99.9% of all the fuel out of Red Hill as of this weekend, this coming up weekend. It was at 99.5% on Monday. So we're now over 104 million gallons of fuel removed. The final phases will occur in the coming months. We're 6 months ahead of schedule. I mean, anytime we're ahead of schedule, I'm almost shocked in our state. So that's great. That's a big success story. we will move forward on all these discussions about leases for the military, but as partners, as an Ohana. And they know that what they do affects us and what we do affects them. It really should be one entity, one Ohana. We'll do better if that happens. So Red Hill was a success. I'm glad that that's getting done. There was no spill at all. We kind of had triple backups to make sure that no fuel could get loose.
In this transition of time with the military and the situation of Red Hill, we had Vice Admiral Wade on the program who talked about the transition and the Pentagon moving him essentially out of this position and creating a new task force that will oversee this next phase. Your thoughts on just the transition here between those entities who are going to be taking over and long-term wise, noting that, yes, everything gets removed, but there's still a lot of work to be done. How do you continue to see that you can hold the military accountable with the remaining stages that are yet to unfold?
So, great question. So it's a handoff. It's a direct handoff to Admiral Barnett and their team. We have the same relationship. So we're close to them. We speak often. Different people, different areas of expertise. So draining Red Hill was one thing, closing it down is the next. And so they know exactly what the mission has to be. First it was to get all of the fuel out, and then now we have to unpack the pipes, which means get the last remnants of fuel out of there, the sludge at the bottom of the tank, and then shut it down. And I think that's what the people want. There are always creative ideas about what you can do with something like this. This is a very unique installation. This is 120 million gallon tankers underground, 20 of them. I mean, it's like the Hoover Dam. It's that huge a thing. This is like the pyramids when you talk about the scope of this project. However, it had its impact, and people don't trust that we could do it safely. Plus, it's very old. So it's old enough that you have to move on from it. So that's a good thing. We did have to do a lot of work to move the fuel to other strategic locations for the good of our national security and our state security. That's been done. So there's a lot of things that don't get mentioned, but they did a good, quiet job of that because there is some classified, needs on this kind of thing.
We had so much time to talk, so many things to talk about. The time just flies. But I do want to ask you, holiday season is here. We start to think about New Year's resolution and what our hopes are for the coming year. Tell us a little bit about, on the personal side, what you'll be doing for the holidays, and also any resolutions you want to share.
Wow. So, look, I'm very grateful that 1 year passed with so many different things that we worked on, and we resolved last year to aggressively look at challenges, and so a few new ones came up. So this year was a very different year than was anticipated. We expected to be mostly focusing on housing projects and homelessness, and we ended up, of course, appropriately focusing on a crisis on Maui that was 4 months of our first 12. The things I want to do, I want to build our economy out so we have more resources for the projects that we've discussed. I want to make sure that we have all the resources to do great things for our state. And that means support from Japan. It means some new energy projects. It means housing. You want to know what I want to do at home? I probably just want to take a nap at this point. We have a Christmas tree, and we've got a menorah in our house, and we've got 2 teenagers who we're going to embrace and love, because there's a lot of times Jamie and I have to be out a great number of hours of the day. But we're just grateful, really. We're grateful as a family that we had an extraordinary year with people. There's so many interesting things that are coming. You saw us launch this program to put doctors into every community and nurses. It's like on super steroids. We had over 1,000 applicants, and we're going to award over 500 scholarships to have doctors everywhere. You'll see that next year. You have this huge list of Kau Hale that's coming together that helps solve the homeless crisis, and it's really a special thing. We got work to do on our courts. We want to put more women into the judgeships so that they perhaps even exceed the number of men. We have lots of challenges in society, and I love to work on these problems. I really do, but mostly I want people to have a peaceful 2024, and I want to see the people of Maui recover. I want to see them comfortable, get their family time back together, and then we can move on as a state.
Okay, so no New Year's resolution, though. Anything that you're hoping to do on a personal level? We talked about a dog in the past.
That's
maybe
right. Maybe a dog. Maybe a dog for Hanukkah. Who knows?
Yes, you never know. Personal resolutions. Like every single year, I hope and expect that I can be fitter and spend more time exercising. And I'm lifting weights now, and I exercise a ton, but I still eat too much pizza. I just don't know if I could give that up given the stresses of this job. But maybe in a couple of years we can get to that. Really, I just want people to know that we're committed as a family to be with others. I want to thank those out there that did extraordinary things over Thanksgiving. It was amazing to see how many people were giving back. We saw foster children supported this last week. 2,500 people came to a gathering to help foster families. There's so much good out there in Hawaii. We just have to continue to keep it together. And we're a family that's going to, put our arms around everyone, and we felt like that from the community. So thank you, everybody.
Governor Green, thank you so much for joining us. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kale Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, always good catching up with Governor Josh Green. We began this conversation, of course, talking about the recent news that came out just a few days ago about Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines. He sounds pretty optimistic about that merger, saying that he's talked with both CEOs and is pleased with the progress that they've made in terms of just trying to maintain the integrity of the Hawaiian Airlines brand, and also optimistic about the future that they have here in Hawaii.
Yeah, you also heard a warning there to anyone who has short-term rentals on Maui, really saying that he is ready with the hammer if not enough people go into this program to try to create rental properties for fire survivors. He says he's willing to do that moratorium on those 15,000 plus units, and that could be a big change. Also talking about the TAT and really pushing to raise that.
Yeah, we heard from him just some of the plans that he would like to do, which would include this climate impact fee, the green fee that was unable to pass last legislative session. He's talking about that, as well as support for insurance being included within this new TAT fund to raise the TAT. But again, the question will be if the legislature and the bodies there will support this effort.
Yeah, you hear him really gearing up. A lot of things to be thankful for. Also talking about the Kau Hale program. We're going to see some major expansion of that. The one by Queens is going to be closing, but we're going to see them popping up all over across the state, including a big one in Waikiki. So very interesting always to catch up with him. He says he eats a little too much pizza. I think given his job, he's allowed the indulgence, but very interesting to hear all he had to say.
Next week, we're going to be switching gears and actually talking with a former governor. Governor John Waihee will join us here in the studio to talk about things that he's up to, as well as a new initiative that's helping to change the landscape of politics and as well as governing in the state of Hawaii. We leave you now with a rainy shot of downtown Honolulu. We hope you're staying dry out there. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of Spotlight Now.